Welcome to the channel. Thanks a lot for joining me. There are two murals of black footballers facing one another across an alleyway in Glasgow. One helped shape football as we know it. The other is Pele. Andrew Watson captained Scotland to a 6-1 win over England on his debut in 1881. He was a pioneer, the world's first black international, but for more than a century the significance of his achievements went unrecognised. Research conducted over the past 3 decades has left us with some biological details. A man descended of slaves and of those who enslaved them, born in Guyana, raised to become an English gentleman and famed as one of Scotland's first icons. And yet today, 100 years on from his death, aged 64, Watson remains something of an enigma, the picture built around him a fractured one. His grainy, faded, sepia image invokes many different emotions: awe, pride, passion, and for one man in particular, discomfort. When Watson moved to Glasgow in 1875, aged 18, he had hardly played football. It was a time before professionalism, when the sport was still evolving and a single set of rules was yet to be universally adopted. Within 6 years, he'd established himself as one of the most talented and well-respected players, a trailblazer who'd helped popularise the Scottish passing and running game, an early step in football's evolution towards what we recognise today. Watson played twice against England, and on each occasion Scotland were convincing winners. The second victory, 5-1 at the original Hampden Park, was a pivotal result that convinced the English Football Association its approach needed to change. They turned to Watson to show them the way as a new elite amateur team was formed. Corinthian FC would later be credited with popularising football around the world. Watson, a public school educated player who would have spoken with an upper class accent of his teammates, was among the first recruited. He assumed the role of Scotch professor and taught his English peers, both at Corinthian and numerous other clubs and representative teams, the science of a more dynamic passing style. He is seen as a conduit who helped modernise football during a great period of upheaval that signalled the death of the individual dribbling game, characterised by a single player running with the ball at his feet surrounded by 8 players that had been favoured by the English. Pele was a genius footballer, but there were thousands of genius footballers whose influence dies with them the second they retire, said Jed O'Brien, founder of the Scottish Football Museum. You can look at any game of football being played anywhere in the world by any person of any gender or ethnicity of culture, and the ghost of Andrew Watson will be looking down on you because they are playing his game. Watson is the most influential black footballer of all time. There is nobody that even comes close. During his lifetime, Watson's influence was felt across the game. He was a captain, a National Cup winner, an administrator, investor, and match official, each achievement and contribution made as a black man to do so. Historians and researchers and academics have worked hard to bring his legacy to light, but unravelling his personal story has presented a different challenge. Watson was born in 1856 in Georgetown, Demerara, a colonial trading post established by the Dutch, captured by the French, then renamed by British rulers who imported slaves from Africa to work on its plantations. Now it's the capital of Guyana, which has been a republic since 1970, 4 years after it declared independence from Britain. It borders Suriname, Venezuela, and Brazil. Watson moved to Britain aged around 2. He was educated at some of the finest schools in England. His family boasted significant wealth and powerful family connections. Liverpudlian poet Mark Al-Nasser spent years researching Watson's background after first seeing himself in the image of the 19th century footballer broadcast on a BBC documentary in 2002. He traced his own ancestry back to Watson's in Guyana. "I saw a black guy from Guyana who was the world's first black footballer, who looked like me and has our family name. I thought, we have to be related," says Al Nasser, who changed his name from Mark Watson when he converted to Islam. "I grew up to feel worthless, that I was nobody, that I was from nothing. There was nothing to give me pride or dignity in being black. So seeing someone like him, one of the very architects of the game, I needed to find out what our connection might be. I was looking for a sense of black pride, something in my history to be proud of." What Al Nasser found were ancestors who were both slaves and slave traders. "The blood of both courses through our veins, and that is a dilemma that I have to reconcile within my soul," he says. And Andrew Watson's family consisted of both. Watson's mother, Anna Rose, was a black woman born into slavery and freed as a young girl, along with her mother, Minky. His father, Peter Miller Watson, was a white Scottish solicitor, amongst the most influential figures in Demerara. He looked after the affairs of Sandbach Tin and Co., a firm that exported sugar, coffee and rum and had been involved in the slave trade. In a complex family tree is also John Gladstone, one of the largest slave owners in the West Indies and the father of William Gladstone, who served for 12 years as British Prime Minister over 4 terms between 1868 and 1894. Watson's family in the 19th century were also expanding into banking and railway development, amassing huge wealth in the process. Andrew Watson was born into one of the most powerful dynastical slavery conglomerates in the history of the British slave trade, Al Nasser says. "This is a guy who lived a life of privilege. He had a prime minister for a cousin, and his family owned a bank." After moving to England with his eldest sister, Annetta, Watson attended Heath Grammar School in Halifax, West Yorkshire, and went on to study at King's College London as well as Glasgow University. Aged 21, he drew on an inheritance of £6,000 plus interest left to him following his father's death. The sum would have been the equivalent of around £700,000 today. He invested some of his money in a football club, Park Grove, as well as in a wholesale warehouse business. After moving on to Queen's Park, where he won 3 Scottish Cups, the Scottish Athletic Journal profiled Watson in 1885 under the headline "Modern Athletic Celebrities." Like many such articles about him, he was described as first class and is said to be playing a sterling honest game. But unlike other reports of the time, there is reference to abuse he had to contend with. Although on more than one occasion subjected to vulgar insults by splenetic, ill-tempered players, he uniformly preserved his gentlemanly demeanour, which has endeared him to his opponents as well as his club companions. To those who had researched Watson, it gives a telling insight into what he had to deal with as a black man. No report of the time explicitly mentioned racism. "Why has the writer written it?" asked Richard McBrearty, curator at the Scottish Football Museum. "I've read hundreds of these articles, and they don't talk of splenetic, ill-tempered players for the white footballers. It's the only reference I've ever seen, and it happens to be a line mentioned in an article about a black player. That was part of what he faced. It sets him out as a champion of football, not just for his playing prowess, but as a black man playing what was basically a white game at that time. He was a pioneer. Watson sits front and centre in one of Scotland's national team's most famous early photos, and his wider influence is now plain to see. So why was he forgotten? Shortly after arriving in London as a footballer in 1882, Watson's first wife, Jessie Nimmo Amor, died. Their two children would remain with their grandparents in Glasgow for the next 30 years. It heralded an unsettled period in Watson's life where he led an almost nomadic existence playing for numerous teams. By 1888, he was in the twilight of his career and playing for Bootle, Everton's main rival on Merseyside at the time. There, he set up a new home with his second wife, Eliza Kate Tyler, with whom he had two more children, retired from football and trained as a maritime engineer. He went to sea, working for the West Indies and Pacific Steamship Company and rising to the rank of chief engineer. To football, he was lost. A mention in the Glasgow Evening Post in 1889 referenced that he was doing well as an engineer, but from public consciousness his presence faded. His death was announced in 1921 in the Richmond and Twickenham Times, which referenced him as being the cousin of former Prime Minister Gladstone. There was no obituary, no football tributes. If you remove Andrew Watson from the lifetime of football and not just wipe him from the history books as previously done, what would have happened to the game? Asked Lowell Walker, author of Andrew Watson, A Straggling Life. He adds, there is a whitewashing of football history as an English game over the past 100 years, and when Scottish influence is pushed out of the game, you also push Andrew Watson's story out. There is a campaign for Watson to be honoured with a statue at Hampden Park, but Al Nasser is against such efforts because of the football family's ties and the money he was bequeathed later in life. If you're going to stand up and say remove William Gladstone's name from the building at Liverpool University because he received money from his father and his links to the slave trade, then what argument have you got of putting up a statue of Watson? Nasser asks. You can't apply a different standard to Watson, he says. Historian Andrew Mitchell believes Watson's story is still to be concluded. Many biographical details remain shrouded in mystery, even if Watson himself helped with recent major rediscoveries. For decades, Watson's last resting place was unknown. It was thought publicly to be in Australia, possibly Mumbai. Mitchell was the man who found the actual grave in a Richmond cemetery in southwest London. In some respect, Watson is finally being recognised as a hugely important figure, says Mitchell, and yet there are still many questions about his life and what he felt. He is an enigma, a very important enigma.